Clayton Vargasy here again with Cottonwood Records. I just finished sitting down with Southern Albertan singer-songwriter John Wort Hannam for an interview. Check it out. Tell us a little bit about your past before we get started, where you were born and kind of what brought you to Canada.
Sure. So I was born in the UK in a group of islands called the Channel Islands. So I was born on the biggest island, Jersey. Mm-hmm. And we immigrated to Canada when I was about 9 years old, and to Calgary. And I went through the school system in Calgary, and went to U of C for a year, went to Mount Royal College for a couple of years, and then I ended up transferring down to the University of Lethbridge to finish a degree, and I haven't left since I've been here. I've always had sort of a little dream, of writing songs and performing, and I remember speaking to my dad once and saying, I'd love to try and write songs and get on a stage, and he said to me, well, you're this is a quote from my dad. He said, "You're dead a long time, so you better hurry up and get started."
And have you always been into music then, or did you make a conscious decision to?
No, I did. I made a conscious decision. I mean, I've always listened to music. I've always loved music. I had a little turntable in my bedroom, the little suitcase kind where you'd pop it open and it had the one little speaker. And I listened to a lot of Beatles when I was a young kid, and a lot of things that don't necessarily show up in my music. I actually listened to a lot of Frank Sinatra as a kid and Elvis and stuff like that. And then when I became a teenager, I listened to a lot of sort of English punk music and English ska music. And then it was actually, I got turned on to singer-songwriter music first when I was about 16. I was remember watching a television show that was sort of the beginnings of sort of Much Music and that kind of thing. And it was a show called Music West, I think. And there was this young 21-year-old Billy Bragg on from London, just playing him and his Telecaster, running through a Fender amp. And that was the first time I started to pay attention to sort of singer-songwriter music. And I remember specifically why I was paying attention was that he was singing about sort of the working class, middle class people, average, ordinary people. And I realized that everything that I had heard on AM radio, it didn't speak to me. And all of a sudden, here's some guy, I could actually relate to the songs. And I thought to myself, this guy's singing about, my family. And that's when I really sort of clued into listening to lyrically driven songs.
Right, so you were recently in Banff for a singer-songwriter residency. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's been music residencies at the Banff Centre for years, but this was the first inaugural singer-songwriter residency. And they brought in sort of some of the big hitters from Nashville and some of the Canadian songwriters, and there was 25 of us, and we all got to sort of for 2 weeks. We had our own studio and our own digs, and basically what they wanted us to do was for 2 weeks was to be creative and write songs. And I struggled for the first 4 days, and it was funny because we would meet every morning. The group would meet every morning at 10 a.m. and everybody was coming going, oh, here's 2 songs I wrote this morning, and here's 3 songs I wrote during breakfast. And I actually, for the first 5 days, I sat staring at a blank piece of paper, and I got nothing done. And at one point, I thought to myself, I'm just going to go home because I'm not getting anything done. I may as well go home and see my family. And then I started thinking about that, and I thought, well, what is the problem? And I realized I was actually homesick for my son. And there it was. That's what I needed. And I started to write a song, and that was the first song I wrote up there. It's called I'll Miss It All. And once I sort of got that first one out of the way, they just started to flow and come, and ended up with it's about 7 songs, and I think I've got about an 8th one that I'll probably finish sometime this week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And you just finished recording a song titled Ain't Enough with us here at Cottonwood Records. Could you talk about that song?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born beside the ocean in the English Channel, and then when we moved to Canada, we moved right to the prairies, and I've always had that sort of inner conflict within me about where I really am supposed to be, and whenever I'm beside the ocean, if I go to sort of the West Coast, or especially the East Coast, I find Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick, I find that when I'm beside that ocean, I kind of feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I'm at home. And the only thing I can sort of figure out from that is that maybe, that's just, again, being born beside the ocean and being raised for the first 8-9 years of my life beside the ocean, that it's in my blood. And whenever I come back to the prairies, I have the same feeling where I go, oh, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it always happens whenever I'm driving south, as soon as I hit the Dairy Queen in Claire's home, as soon as I pass the Dairy Queen and I see the Porcupine Hills on the right, and I look down south and I can see the windmills, especially at night when you see the red lights on top of the windmills, and my shoulders relax and I kind of feel like, oh yeah, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I wanted to write about sort of that conflict, and so I imagine sort of a relationship of someone being born beside the ocean and somebody being born on the flatlands, and I wanted to explore that idea of how do people from sort of differing landscapes and different upbringings, how do they reconcile those things when they come together and try and sort of create a union.
So the most recent album that you released, titled Love Lives On, could you talk about that album a little bit?
Yeah, I had sort of two objectives with that record. One, I wanted to make a full band record. I had made sort of some pared down records before that and very acoustic records, and this one I wanted full drums, electric bass, and lots of layers and lots of instrumentation. The other thing with that record that's a little different than the others is I wanted it to be, well, I shouldn't say I wanted it to be, it ended up being more personal than I suppose other records were. And it was just a time of my life though where I really started to question whether I wanted to continue doing this. And so I wrote about that quite a bit and sort of wrote about struggles of being a person, a sort of an artist, trying to sort of get out there and play, but also wanting to be home as well, and wanting to play a role, of being dad and husband and musician all at the same time. So, and I think now it's sort of that pendulum is still swinging. The songs that I can think about that I've written recently and the ones up at the Banff Centre are quite personal as well.
Mm-hmm. Are there any tips or tricks or kind of words of wisdom you'd like to share with anyone looking to get into the business?
My advice to people sort of just starting to sort of wanting to play music is play as much as you can, play in front of as many people as you can, take every opportunity that is offered to you, especially at the start. Play, go to open stages, drive to Edmonton for $25 and a jug of beer, if that puts you in front of 100 people, opening for somebody. Do whatever you can to sort of get your music out there, get your chops, get experience on a stage, get experience in front of an audience. I think that's the most important thing. At some point, you have to get out of your basement and you have to stand in front of people and present what you have created. And I think that's the most important thing.
Cool. So what can people expect in the future from you?
Well, definitely another record. There will be a record made in 2017 for sure. I'm looking forward to getting back into the studio.
Cool. And what's the best way for people to follow along with your journey?
Probably from the website, they can find all the other avenues, all the social media. So johnworthannam.com, and then find links to all the social media and stuff like that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You guys can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and the web. Just all at Cottonwood Records. Thank you guys for checking us out.